The job was supposed to be simple. Fly in, stand around looking dangerous, fly out, collect the credits. That was what Captain Cale Morrow told himself when he signed the contract. A basic escort mission through a quiet stretch of frontier space. The client was some minor Valkyrie royal, a princess, apparently, though Cale had never cared much about alien politics. All he knew was that the pay was decent and the route was safe. He was wrong about the second part. Cale stood in the narrow corridor of the Valkyrie flagship, checking his pulse rifle for the third time. Around him, his small team of human mercenaries did the same. There were 8 of them in total, hired muscle, nothing more. The Valkyrie Royal Guard handled the real security. Tall, silver-skinned soldiers in gleaming armor, they moved through the ship like ghosts, their bioluminescent markings glowing faintly in the dim light. They barely looked at the humans. When they did, it was with the kind of expression someone might give a stray animal that had wandered into a formal dinner. Ablative assets, one of the Valkyrie officers had called them during the briefing. Cale had looked up the word later. It meant something designed to be destroyed so that something more valuable could survive. He did not take it personally. He had been called worse. The princess herself was not what Cale had expected. Princess Salith Val Thuron was young by Valkyrie standards, which meant she was probably older than every human on the ship combined. But she carried herself with a kind of nervous energy that reminded Cale of a new recruit on their first deployment. She smiled too much. She asked too many questions. She wanted to know where the humans came from, what Earth was like, whether it was true that humans could not see in ultraviolet light. Cale answered her questions with short, polite words. He was not there to make friends. He was there to stand between her and anything that wanted to hurt her, and then collect his money and leave. On the 3rd day of the journey, the Krev came. The Krev hegemony was a collection of reptilian warlord clans that raided frontier space for resources, slaves, and sport. Their ships were ugly, brutal things, all jagged armor and oversized weapons. When 6 of them dropped out of faster-than-light travel directly ahead of the convoy, the Valkyrie captain barely had time to raise shields before the first volley tore through the escort frigates. The flagship shook like a toy in the hand of an angry child. Alarms screamed. Lights flickered and died, replaced by the dim red glow of emergency power. Cale grabbed the wall to keep from falling and heard the sound that every soldier dreads, the deep, grinding roar of a hull breach. They were being boarded. The Valkyrie Royal Guard moved to intercept. They were good. Cale could admit that. They held the first wave of Krev boarders in the main corridor for almost 10 minutes, their energy lances cutting through the scaled bodies with surgical precision. But the Krev kept coming. They poured through the breach like water through a crack, snarling and firing heavy slug throwers that punched through Valkyrie armor like paper. One by one, the Royal Guards fell. Cale gathered his team at the second defensive line, 50 meters from the princess's chambers. "Hold here," he said. His voice was calm. His hands were steady. Inside, his heart was hammering so hard he could feel it in his teeth. They held. For 22 minutes, 8 humans held a corridor against a force that had already destroyed an elite alien guard unit. They used every trick Cale had learned in 15 years of ugly wars, overlapping fields of fire, improvised barricades from torn hull plating. Grenades bounced off walls at angles that the Krev never expected. 2 of his team went down in the first 5 minutes. Another 3 in the next 10. But they held. Then the Krev boarding chief came through. It was enormous. 3 meters tall, covered in thick armored scales the color of dried blood, carrying a massive vibro, axe that hummed with killing energy. It walked through the barricade like it was made of cardboard, swatting aside the last 2 mercenaries with a backhand that sent them crashing into the walls. Cale stood alone in the corridor. Behind him, the door to the princess's chambers. He did not think about heroism. He did not think about duty or honor or any of the words that people put on memorials. He thought about a scared young woman behind that door who had smiled at him and asked him about Earth. He raised his rifle and fired. The bolts hit the boarding chief in the chest, scorching its scales but not stopping it. The creature roared and swung the axe. Cale dove under it, feeling the displaced air tug at his hair. He rolled, came up firing, put 3 rounds into the thing's knee joint. It stumbled. He pressed the advantage, closing the distance, a terrible idea against something that big, but he had no choice. The axe caught him on the backswing. Not a direct hit, a glancing blow that shattered 3 ribs and sent him spinning into the wall. He tasted blood. His left hand was gone below the wrist, severed clean. He did not scream. He did not have time. The boarding chief raised the axe for the killing blow. Cale pulled the plasma charge from his belt with his remaining hand, armed it, and lunged forward. He pressed the charge against the creature's throat and detonated it. The explosion threw him backward through the door of the princess's chambers. He landed on his back in front of Salith, who was pressed against the far wall, her silver skin pale with terror. The boarding chief collapsed in the doorway, most of its head gone, its massive body blocking the entrance. Cale lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling. His vision was going dark. He could feel his body shutting down, too much blood loss, too much damage. He had maybe a minute left. "Are you?" Salith's voice was shaking. "Are you alive?" "For now," he whispered, and then everything went black. He expected to die. He had made peace with that somewhere between pulling the plasma charge and pressing it against alien scales. Humans were short-lived anyway. At least this death meant something. But he did not die. He woke in a medical bay that looked like it was built from crystal and light. His body felt strange, too heavy in some places, too light in others. He looked down. His left hand was back, but it was not his hand. It was made of something silver and alive, Valkyrie biotech woven into his flesh. A shadow fell over him. Cale looked up. She was the tallest Valkyrie he had ever seen. Her silver skin was flawless, her bioluminescent markings burning with cold blue light. She wore robes that looked like they were made from liquid starlight. Her eyes were ancient, not old, but ancient, carrying the weight of centuries the way a mountain carries snow. Queen Ilvari Val Thuron, ruler of the Valkyrie Dominion, looked down at the broken human mercenary in the bed, and she did not blink. "You preserved what is mine," she said. Her voice was soft and cold, like wind over frozen water. "And so, by the ancient law of the Dead of Crimson, you are now mine as well." Something ignited inside Cale's chest. Not pain, exactly, something deeper, something that wrapped around his heart and his bones and his blood like invisible chains made of fire. He tried to speak. He tried to argue. But the burning in his chest stole his breath, and the queen simply watched him with those ancient, unblinking eyes. "Welcome to my service, Captain Morrow," she said. And she turned and walked away, leaving him chained to a throne he had never wanted to serve. The throne station of Elvaris was the size of a small moon. It hung in the void like a jewel carved from living crystal, its surface shimmering with patterns of light that shifted and breathed like something alive. Millions of Valkyrie lived within its layered districts, nobles, scholars, merchants, soldiers, all orbiting the queen-like planets around a cold and brilliant star. Cale saw none of its beauty. All he saw was a cage. They gave him quarters that were nicer than any room he had ever slept in. The walls glowed with soft light. The bed adjusted itself to his body. The food was prepared fresh by automated systems and tasted like nothing he had ever eaten before, delicate, complex, perfect. They gave him clothes made from fabrics that felt like wearing a cloud. They gave him a title, sworn shield of the royal blood. They gave him everything except the one thing that mattered. On his second day, Cale walked toward the docking bay. He made it 40 meters before the oath chain activated. It started as a warmth in his chest, then became a pressure, then became a fire that spread through every nerve in his body. He dropped to his knees on the polished crystal floor, gasping, his vision going white. A Valkyrie guard watched him from down the corridor, arms folded, expression blank. Kale crawled back toward his quarters. The pain faded with every meter he retreated. By the time he reached his room, it was gone, replaced by a dull ache that sat behind his ribs like a second heartbeat. He tried 3 more times over the next week. Different routes, different times, different approaches. The result was always the same. The chain knew. It always knew. "It is woven into the biotech they used to rebuild your body," explained a quiet voice one evening. Kale looked up from his untouched dinner to find Princess Salith standing in his doorway, her luminescent markings dim with what he was learning to recognize as sadness. "When they repaired your hand, your ribs, your organs, they threaded the chain into the new tissue. It is part of you now." "Then cut it out of me," Kale said. "It would kill you. The chain is in your heart, your lungs, your spine. Removing it would be like trying to remove your blood." Salith stepped inside, uninvited, and sat in the chair across from him. "I am sorry, Captain Morrow. I did not know she would do this." "It is not your fault. It is my mother's, which makes it mine." She met his eyes, and Kale saw something in her expression that surprised him, genuine shame. "I have been studying the law. The debt of crimson has not been invoked in over 400 years and never on a non-Valkyrie. There may be challenges I can raise, exceptions, loopholes." Kale leaned back in his chair and studied the alien princess who was trying to free him. She was not what he had expected from royalty. There was no arrogance in her, no sense of entitlement. She reminded him, strangely, of the young officers he had served with in the Union Marines, the good ones, the ones who actually cared whether their soldiers lived or died. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "Because you bled for me," she said simply. "And because what my mother has done is wrong. Chains do not create loyalty, they only create prisoners." The days became weeks. Kale learned the rhythms of the throne station, though he was never part of them. He was a curiosity, the human pet of the royal family, whispered about in corridors and stared at in the great halls. Some Valkyrie looked at him with disgust, some with pity, a few with a kind of dark fascination, as though he were a dangerous animal on a short leash. Commander Dreth was the worst of them. The Queen's elite guard captain was everything the Valkyrie valued: tall, graceful, ancient, and utterly convinced of his species' superiority. He made it his personal mission to remind Kale of his place. Training exercises, Dreth called them. Sparring sessions where Kale was matched against Valkyrie guards twice his size, with rules that always seemed to favor his opponents. The guards were allowed energy shields. Kale was not. They could use full-strength strikes. Kale's chain tightened every time he swung too hard at a Valkyrie noble. He lost most of the fights. He made sure that every loss cost them something. "You fight like a wounded animal," Dreth told him after one session, watching Kale spit blood onto the training room floor. "All desperation and no grace." "I fight like someone who has been in real combat," Kale answered. "You should try it sometime." The chain pulsed in warning, but Dreth just smiled, a cold, thin expression that did not reach his eyes. The Queen summoned Kale once a week. These meetings took place in her private chambers, a vast room at the heart of the station where the walls were made of something that looked like frozen lightning. She sat on a throne that grew from the floor like a living thing, and she asked him questions. Not commands, questions. She wanted to know about human history, their wars, their migrations, their stubborn refusal to stay dead as a species. She asked about Earth, about the colonies, about why humans kept expanding into space when they were so clearly outmatched by older civilizations. She asked about pain, about fear, about what it felt like to face death and choose to fight anyway. Kale answered carefully. He was not foolish enough to think these conversations were friendly. The Queen was studying him, collecting data, trying to understand the strange creature she had chained to her throne. But there was something else in her questions too, something that almost sounded like genuine curiosity. As though, after thousands of years of ruling, she had finally encountered something she could not predict. "Your species lives, what, 80 years? 100 with medical support," she asked one evening, her ancient eyes fixed on him. Something like that. And yet you threw yourself at a creature 3 times your size, knowing it would likely kill you. For a person you had known for 3 days, a person who was not even your own kind. She tilted her head. Why? Cale thought about the question. He thought about Salith pressed against the wall, terrified. He thought about the boarding chief raising its axe. He thought about the cold calculation he had made in that moment, not bravery, not heroism, just a simple decision that someone needed to stand in the way, and he was the only one left. Because someone had to, he said. The Queen studied him for a long time. That is either the most noble thing I have ever heard, she said, or the most foolish. Probably both. That night, Cale sat alone in his quarters and composed a coded message. It took him 3 hours to write it, a string of numbers and letters hidden inside a routine trade inquiry, routed through a sympathetic alien merchant who owed Cale a favor from years ago. The message was short. Alive, trapped, Valkyrie Throne Station, chain technology in my body, need options. KM. It was addressed to Lisa Tanaka, the best engineer and the worst poker player Cale had ever known. If anyone in the galaxy could figure out how to break an alien chain from the inside, it was Wrench. 2 weeks later, a reply came back through the same channel, hidden in a shipping manifest. Received, coming, don't do anything stupid before I get there. LT. Cale almost smiled, almost. Then the Queen made her announcement. In a formal ceremony attended by the entire court, she declared that Cale Morrow would serve as Princess Salith's permanent personal bodyguard, bound to her side at all times, responsible for her safety with his life. The court erupted in whispers. Dreth's face went rigid with fury. Salith looked at Cale with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and guilt. After the ceremony, the Queen found Cale alone in a corridor. She stood closer than she had ever stood before, and looked down at him with those eyes that had watched empires rise and fall. Your species fascinates me, she said quietly. You burn so briefly, yet you burn so fiercely. I wish to understand what makes something so fragile choose to stand when everything tells it to kneel. Cale met her gaze. The chain hummed in his chest, a constant reminder of what she had taken from him, but his voice was steady when he spoke. Maybe that is exactly what you will never understand. The Queen's expression did not change, but something flickered in her ancient eyes, something that might have been surprise or respect, or the faintest shadow of doubt. She turned and walked away without another word, and Cale stood alone in the crystal corridor of his beautiful prison, the chains burning quietly inside him, and wondered how long a man could stay unbroken. 4 months into his captivity, Cale Morrow discovered something strange. He was getting used to it. Not the chain that still burned every time he wandered too close to freedom or raised his voice too sharply against a noble, but the routine, the rhythm of life in the Valkyrie court, the daily dance of politics and ceremony and quiet danger that was becoming familiar. And familiarity, Cale knew from experience, was the most dangerous trap of all. Comfortable prisoners stopped looking for the door. He refused to let that happen. His days followed a pattern now. He woke early, trained alone in the lower gymnasium where the lesser guards exercised, then reported to Princess Salith's quarters. He accompanied her everywhere: council sessions, academic lectures at the Grand Observatory, diplomatic receptions where alien ambassadors from a dozen species gathered to trade favors and lies. He stood behind her chair, silent and watchful, the human shadow of a Valkyrie princess. The court had not grown to accept him, but they had grown to acknowledge him, which was different. A few of the younger Valkyrie guards had begun approaching him after training sessions, curious about his fighting techniques. Human close-quarters combat was crude by Valkyrie standards, no elegance, no flowing forms, but it was effective in ways that surprised them. Cale taught them how to fight in tight spaces, how to use an enemy's size against them, how to keep moving when everything in your body told you to stop. Your method has no beauty, one young guard named Thalov said after a particularly rough session. My method keeps me alive, Kale replied. Beauty is for people who have never been punched in the face. Thalov considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly, as if Kale had shared some deep wisdom. Salith, meanwhile, was changing. The shy princess who had smiled too much and asked too many questions was still there, but something harder was growing underneath. She had begun attending political councils not as an observer but as a participant, speaking up about trade reform and colonial policy in ways that made the older nobles shift uncomfortably in their seats. She talked openly about the oath chain system, how it was outdated, how it created resentment instead of loyalty, how it damaged the Dominion's reputation among other galactic powers. The nobles listened politely and did nothing, but Kale noticed the way some of them watched her afterward, with expressions that went beyond mere disagreement. You are making enemies, he told her one evening as they walked through the living gardens of the station's upper ring. Good, she said. If I am making enemies, it means I am saying things that matter. It also means someone might try to kill you. She looked at him sideways. That is why I have you. He did not argue, but he started paying closer attention. The first sign of trouble came on a quiet evening, 3 days after a particularly heated council session, where Salith had publicly questioned the Purist faction's proposal to restrict human trade ships from Valkyrie space. Kale was conducting his nightly sweep of her quarters, a habit the Valkyrie guards found amusing and unnecessary, when his human nose caught something wrong. The air smelled different, not bad exactly, almost sweet, like crushed flowers, but underneath the sweetness was something metallic, something that made the back of his throat tighten. Kale had grown up on a colony world where atmospheric leaks could kill you in minutes. He knew what poisoned air smelled like. He grabbed Salith and pulled her out of the room. What are you? The air. Something is in the air filtration system. I do not smell anything. You would not. Valkyrie olfactory senses work on different wavelengths. Kale was already moving, dragging her down the corridor toward the emergency atmospheric station. He sealed her quarters remotely and triggered a contamination alert. The analysis took 20 minutes. The results made the station security chief turn pale, or whatever the Valkyrie equivalent of pale was, his luminescent markings flickering rapidly. A compound called Velith-9 had been introduced into the atmospheric filter serving Salith's quarters. It was colorless and odorless to Valkyrie senses. In low concentrations, it caused confusion and memory loss. In the concentration found in Salith's chambers, it would have caused cardiac arrest within 6 hours. She would have gone to sleep and never woken up. The irony burned like acid. The human, the lesser species, the ablative asset, had saved the princess precisely because his biology was different. His alien nose had caught what no Valkyrie could have detected. The queen was furious. Not visibly, she was too old and too controlled for visible fury. But the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees when the security chief delivered his report. She questioned her guards. She questioned the maintenance staff. She questioned Commander Dreth, who stood perfectly still and expressed perfect outrage and perfect confusion about how such a thing could have happened. Kale watched Dreth's performance and did not believe a single word of it. In the days that followed, the investigation found nothing conclusive. The Velith-9 had been introduced through a maintenance access point that dozens of personnel had clearance to reach. No evidence pointed to any specific individual. The case was officially classified as under continued review, which Kale recognized as the Valkyrie equivalent of sweeping something under a rug. But the queen was not stupid. She summoned Kale to her chambers and for the first time spoke to him not as a master to a servant, but as a ruler to a soldier. There is a faction within my court that would rather see my daughter dead than see the Dominion change, she said. They call themselves purists. They believe in the old ways, Valkyrie supremacy, rigid hierarchy, the chain as sacred law. My daughter's reforms threaten everything they hold dear. I know, Kale said. Dreth is one of them. The Queen's eyes narrowed. You have no proof of that. I have instincts, and 15 years of watching people lie. A silence stretched between them. Then the Queen did something unexpected. She loosened the chain. Not much. Not enough to let him leave the station, but enough to remove some of its restrictions. He could now move freely through all sections of the station. He could carry weapons. He could act on his own judgment to protect the princess without waiting for royal authorization. Do not mistake this for trust, the Queen said. You are a tool I have invested in. I do not allow my tools to be broken by others. Understood, Kale said. He did not thank her. She had not earned his thanks. Commander Dreth found him in the corridor afterward. The tall Valkyrie stepped into his path, blocking the way with his body and his contempt. I heard the Queen has given her pet a longer leash, Dreth said. How touching. Kale looked up at him. For 4 months, the chain had tightened every time he had stood too firmly against a noble, but the restrictions were different now. The leash was longer, and Kale was very tired of being called a pet. Step aside, Commander, he said quietly. Or what? You will bare your teeth at me, animal. Kale did not move. He did not raise his voice. He simply held Dreth's gaze with the steady, patient calm of a man who had faced things far worse than an arrogant alien with a superiority complex. After a long moment, something flickered in Dreth's expression, not fear but recognition. The recognition that the creature in front of him was not a pet, and had never been one. Dreth stepped aside. He did it slowly, deliberately, making it clear that it was his choice, but he did it. That night, Kale received another coded message from Lissa. She had arrived in a system 2 jumps from the throne station, posing as an independent trader hauling mineral samples. She had been studying the oath chain technology, pulling every scrap of information she could find from black market data brokers and renegade Valkyrie scientists. The news was not good. The chain is not just legal, it is biological. It is woven into your reconstructed tissue at the cellular level. Removing it is theoretically possible but would require Valkyrie royal-grade medical equipment and a very skilled surgeon. Without both, the procedure would kill you. I am working on it. Stay alive. LT. Kale read the message twice, then deleted it. He sat in the dark for a long time, feeling the chain pulse gently in his chest like a second heart that did not belong to him. Then a priority alert shattered the silence. Every screen in the station blazed red. Kale was on his feet and moving before the first word of the announcement finished. The Purist faction had made their move. High Lord Valen, the leader of the Purists, had seized 3 outer districts of the throne station with the help of loyalist military units. He had declared a formal challenge of sovereignty against the Queen, an ancient right that demanded the monarch prove her right to rule or surrender the throne. And Princess Salith, who had been attending an evening lecture in the outer academic ring, was now trapped behind Purist lines. Kale felt the chain pull him in 2 directions at once. The Queen's silent command to return to the inner sanctum, and everything else inside him screaming to go after the one person who had treated him like a human being. He stood in the corridor, torn between 2 fires, and made his choice. The inner sanctum of the throne station was locked down tight. Blast doors sealed every corridor. Energy shields hummed behind the walls. The Queen's loyalist guards moved through the passageways in precise formations, setting up defensive positions and communication relays. It was organized, efficient, and utterly useless to Kale, because the only person he cared about was on the wrong side of those doors. The Queen stood at the center of her war room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the station's districts in sharp blue light. 3 of the outer rings glowed red, Purist-controlled. The inner rings remained blue. but the gap between them was a maze of contested corridors and sealed bulkheads. Somewhere in that maze was Salith. "I cannot send my forces," the Queen said. Her voice was perfectly controlled, but Kale had learned to read the small signs, the slight dimming of her bioluminescent markings, the barely visible tension in her jaw. She was afraid, not for herself, but for what an open war inside the station would mean. If Loyalist troops enter the contested zones, Valen will claim it as an act of aggression. The challenge of sovereignty has legal protections. If I break them, I lose the support of the neutral factions. And if I lose them, I lose the throne. So the law protects the people who are breaking the law, Kale said. "Welcome to politics, Captain Morrow." Kale stepped forward. "Send me." The Queen looked at him. For a long moment, something passed between them, not warmth, not friendship, but a raw and honest understanding between two people who had run out of better options. "You are not Valkyrie," she said slowly. "You are not bound by our political laws. You are not a soldier of the crown. You are a bound servant acting to protect your assigned charge. The challenge of sovereignty has no provisions for—" She paused, and something that might have been dark humor flickered across her ancient face. "For a pet escaping its leash." "Then let me off the leash." The Queen raised her hand. Kale felt something shift inside his chest, the chain loosening, unwinding, releasing its grip on his bones and his blood. For the first time since he had woken up in that medical bay, the constant pressure behind his ribs disappeared entirely. He took a breath and felt it fill his lungs completely, without restriction, without pain. He was still bound. He could feel the chain still there, dormant, waiting. But its active hold was gone. He could move. He could fight. He could choose. "Bring her back," the Queen said. Kale nodded once and left the war room at a run. He contacted Lissa from a secure terminal in the lower maintenance levels. Her face appeared on the screen, framed by the cluttered interior of her smuggling frigate, the Rusty Nail. "Took you long enough," she said. "I have been monitoring Valkyrie military channels for the last hour. What is happening in there?" Princess is captured. I need to get her out." Lissa did not waste time with questions. She was already pulling up schematics. "I hacked into the station's maintenance network 2 weeks ago. I have full maps of the subsurface infrastructure, cooling systems, waste recycling, construction tunnels, the works. The pretty parts of the station are locked down, but the guts, nobody is watching the guts." "How do I get in?" "Service hatch G17, lower industrial ring. I will guide you through from here. I am also sending 2 of my crew to meet you at Junction 9, Patel and Akafar. You remember them." Kale remembered them. Patel was a former demolition specialist who could open any door ever made, and Akafar was the quietest, deadliest close combat fighter Kale had ever worked with. "Good. We move in 15 minutes." The underbelly of the throne station was nothing like the gleaming crystal corridors above. Down here, the station was all raw metal and exposed conduits, massive pipes carrying coolant and recycled atmosphere through tunnels wide enough to drive a vehicle through. The air was thick and warm, humming with the vibration of machinery that kept millions of Valkyrie alive. Emergency lighting cast everything in a dull amber glow. It was ugly, cramped and perfect for humans. The Valkyrie had built their station for elegance. Their corridors were wide and tall, designed for beings that moved with flowing grace. They had never considered that someone might crawl through the maintenance tunnels with a welding torch and a stolen schematic. Their security systems monitored the main passageways, the lift shafts, the grand halls. Down here, in the crawlspaces and service corridors, there was nothing but dust and silence. Kale moved fast. Lissa guided him through the maze from her ship, her voice steady in his earpiece, calling out turns and junctions and warning him about maintenance drones that might detect movement. Patel and Akafar joined him at Junction 9 without a word, just nods, weapons checks, and the comfortable silence of people who had trusted each other with their lives before. They climbed through ventilation shafts. They crawled through gaps between walls that were never meant for foot traffic. When they hit a sealed bulkhead, Patel cracked it open with a shaped charge so small it barely made a sound. When they encountered a Purist patrol in a wider service corridor, HFY neutralized both guards before they could raise an alarm, silent, efficient, and gone before the bodies hit the floor. "The princess is being held in the academic wing, level 3, Lissa reported. "I am reading 8 guards outside the main door, another 4 inside. They have her in a lecture hall." 12 guards, Patel muttered. 3 of us. 4-1, Kale said. "I have had worse." They entered through the ceiling. Patel blew the ventilation grate at the exact moment Kale tossed a flashbang into the room below. The explosion of light and sound was designed for human warfare, tuned to frequencies that Valthree senses found particularly overwhelming. The guards inside staggered, their luminescent markings flaring wildly as their sensory systems overloaded. Kale dropped through the opening and hit the ground firing. 2 guards went down before they could recover. HFY came through behind him, moving like smoke, and took out a third with a blade across the throat. Patel followed, covering the door, dropping the first guard who tried to rush in from outside. The fight was brutal and fast. The Purist guards were elite soldiers, well-trained, well-armed, and fighting for a cause they believed in. But they were fighting in a confined space against humans who had been bred by war and hardship to excel in exactly these conditions. Kale did not fight with elegance. He fought like something that had been backed into a corner and decided to bite. He took hits. An energy lance grazed his shoulder, burning through his jacket and the skin beneath. A guard caught him with a kick that cracked something in his already damaged ribs. He kept fighting. He always kept fighting. Then Dreth appeared in the doorway. The commander had abandoned his loyalist uniform for Purist colors, dark silver and black, the old colors of Valthree supremacy. He looked at Kale across the ruined lecture hall and smiled. "The pet has come to fetch its mistress," Dreth said. He drew his ceremonial blade, a weapon that hummed with energy, designed for ritual combat between nobles. "How fitting that you will die here, among the wreckage, like the animal you are." Kale was already bleeding from 3 wounds. His shoulder burned. His ribs screamed. The oath-chain biotech in his body was starting to flicker under the strain. He could feel it misfiring, sending jolts of pain through his nervous system at random intervals. None of that mattered. Dreth was faster than Kale. He was stronger. He had centuries of combat training and a weapon that could cut through steel. He struck first, a sweeping blow that Kale barely dodged, the blade passing close enough to singe the hair on his arm. Kale countered with a punch to the throat. Dreth blocked it and responded with an elbow that split Kale's lip open. They traded blows in the flickering light, Dreth elegant and precise, Kale rough and relentless. Every time Dreth knocked him down, Kale got back up. Every time the blade cut him, Kale closed the distance again. Dreth hit him with a combination that would have ended most fights: blade to the side, knee to the stomach, elbow to the back of the head. Kale went down hard, tasting blood and seeing stars. "Stay down," Dreth hissed. "Stay down and accept what you are." Kale got up. Something changed in Dreth's eyes. The contempt was still there, but underneath it was something new, confusion, and beneath the confusion, the first thin crack of fear. He had never fought something that simply would not stop. Valthree combat was built on skill and speed, and the assumption that enough damage would end any opponent. Kale was bleeding from 6 wounds and kept coming. Kale caught the next blade strike on his forearm, the silver biotech hand, which absorbed the energy with a shower of sparks, and used the opening to drive his forehead into Dreth's face. The headbutt shattered the commander's nose. As Dreth staggered backward, Kale grabbed his weapon arm, twisted it at an angle that Valthree joints were not designed to bend, and slammed him face first into the wall. Dreth slid to the floor, unconscious. Kale stood over him, swaying, bleeding, every part of his body screaming at him to collapse. Behind him, Patel and HFY had finished the remaining guards. The lecture hall was silent except for heavy breathing. He turned and found Salith. She was pressed against the far wall, unharmed but pale, her markings flickering with shock. She stared at him, at the blood on his face, the burns on his shoulder, the way he stood like a man held upright by nothing but stubbornness. "You came," she whispered. "Yeah. You did not have to." Kale wiped blood from his eyes with the back of his hand. "Yeah," he said, "that is the point." The extraction was harder than the rescue. Kale's body was failing. The chain biotech in his tissue was destabilizing, misfiring, sending waves of agony through his chest at random intervals. Twice he seized up in the tunnels, his muscles locking, his heart stuttering. HFY carried him through the worst sections. Patel cleared the path ahead. They made it back to Loyalist territory through the same maintenance tunnels they had come in through. The blast doors opened, and Kale stumbled into the inner sanctum with the princess at his side and his crew at his back. Then his legs gave out. He hit the crystal floor and did not get up. The chain was tearing itself apart inside him, the Valkyrie biotech rejecting his human biology under the extreme stress, attacking his own cells like a poison. His body shook. His vision dissolved into static and pain. Lissa's voice was in his earpiece, then above him. She had somehow gotten into the station, because of course she had. She was kneeling beside him, her hands on his face, shouting medical terms at the Valkyrie physicians who were rushing toward them. The Queen arrived. She stood over Kale's broken body and looked down at him with an expression that no one in her court had ever seen before. Lissa looked up at the ancient monarch, her eyes fierce and unafraid. "The thing you put inside him is tearing him apart," she said. "You either let me remove it or he dies. Choose now." The Queen stared at the human woman who dared to speak to her without title or deference. Then she looked at Kale, who had crossed an entire station through its guts, defeated her own guard captain, rescued her daughter, and crawled back to her feet dying. For the first time in 3,000 years, Queen Elvari Val Thuron hesitated. The Royal Medical Wing was the most advanced facility in the Valkyrie Dominion. Its walls were made of living tissue that monitored the patients within them. Its machines could rebuild organs, regrow limbs, and reverse aging at the cellular level. It had kept the Queen alive for 3,000 years and had once reassembled a Valkyrie admiral who had been exposed to hard vacuum for 6 minutes. None of its physicians had ever tried to save a human before. Kale lay on the surgical platform, his body shaking with tremors that came and went like waves. The oath chain biotech was eating him alive. The Valkyrie tissue woven into his muscles and organs was attacking his human cells, treating them as foreign invaders. His immune system was fighting back, and the war between the two was destroying everything in its path. Lissa stood at the head of the platform, her sleeves rolled up, her dark hair pulled back, her eyes locked on a holographic display that showed Kale's failing body in terrible detail. Around her, 4 Valkyrie royal physicians worked in tense silence. They did not like taking orders from a human. They liked watching a patient die on their table even less. "The chain is integrated into his cardiovascular and nervous systems," the lead physician said, his luminescent markings pale with stress. "Removing it requires disconnecting it from the heart, the spinal column, and both lungs simultaneously. If we are off by more than 2 seconds between disconnections, the shock will kill him." "Then do not be off by more than 2 seconds, Lissa said. The Queen watched from behind a transparent barrier. Beside her stood Salith, who had refused to leave despite her mother's orders. The princess pressed her hand against the barrier, her markings dim, her eyes fixed on the human who had bled for her twice and was now dying because of it. "Why does he matter to you?" the Queen asked quietly without looking at her daughter. "Because he chose to help me when he had no reason to. Because he was kind when no one required him to be. Because he is a good man, Mother, and the system you built is killing him." The Queen said nothing for a long time. On the other side of the barrier, Lissa was guiding the Valkyrie surgeons through a procedure that combined human medical knowledge with Valkyrie biotechnology in ways that had never been attempted. She had spent weeks studying the chain from stolen data, building theoretical models, running simulations on her ship's computer. She had prepared for this moment without knowing when it would come, because that was what Lissa did. She prepared for the worst and then dared it to happen. The surgery took 4 hours. 3 times Kale's heart stopped. 3 times the machines brought him back. Once, the chain flared so violently that it burned a network of thin scars across his chest, branching lines like lightning frozen in skin. The Valkyrie surgeons wanted to stop. Lissa refused. "He has survived worse," she said, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. "I have seen him survive worse. Keep going." They kept going. The last piece of the chain was embedded in the base of his skull, wrapped around the brain stem like a vine around a tree. Removing it required precision measured in fractions of a millimeter. The lead surgeon hesitated, his instruments hovering above the tissue. One wrong move and Kale would never wake up. Lissa placed her hand over the surgeon's. "Trust me," she said. "I know where the line is." She guided the cut. The chain released, and the last piece of Valkyrie control was lifted from Kale Morrow's body. The monitors stabilized. His heartbeat steadied. His breathing deepened. The branching scars on his chest glowed faintly for a moment, a ghost of the chain's energy, and then faded to pale white lines against his skin. Lissa let out a breath she had been holding for 4 hours and sat down on the floor hard. Kale did not wake up for 2 days. When he did, the first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the silence of the room. There were machines beeping, voices murmuring, the quiet hum of the station's systems, but the silence inside him. The constant pressure behind his ribs, the burning weight of the chain that had been his companion for 5 months, was gone. His chest felt empty and light, like a cage with the door standing open. He opened his eyes. The Queen was sitting in a chair beside his bed. She looked different. Not older, Valkyrie did not age in ways humans could perceive, but somehow smaller, as though removing the chain from Kale had taken something from her as well. "It is done," she said. "The chain is removed. You are free." Kale stared at her. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. He had expected to feel triumph or anger or at least satisfaction. Instead, he felt something far more complicated. "Why?" he asked. His voice was rough from disuse. The Queen was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was stripped of its usual cold authority. It was just a voice, ancient and tired and honest. "Because you taught me something I had forgot, perhaps something I never truly knew." She met his eyes, and for the first time Kale saw her not as a monarch or a jailer, but as a person impossibly old, impossibly powerful, and still capable of being wrong. The most powerful bonds are the ones that can be broken and are not. You could have hated my daughter for what I did to you. You could have let her die and called it justice. Instead, you chose to save her, not because of the chain, in spite of it. She stood. "You are free to leave. No conditions, no debts, no laws invoked in the dark to keep you chained." Kale sat up slowly. His body ached, but it was a clean ache, the honest pain of healing, not the false fire of the chain. He looked at the Queen and said the only thing that felt true. "Thank you." She nodded once, turned, and walked away. At the door, she paused without looking back. "Captain Morrow, if you ever return to my station, you will come as a guest, not a servant." Then she was gone. Kale found Lissa asleep in a chair in the waiting area outside the medical wing, her head tilted at an angle that was going to give her a terrible neck ache. He stood over her for a moment, looking at the woman who had crossed half a galaxy to pull alien chains out of his body, and felt something warm and simple that he had not felt in a very long time. He tapped her boot with his foot. She jolted awake, saw him standing there, and her face broke into a grin that was half relief and half fury. You absolute idiot, she said. Do you know how hard it is to remove parasitic biotech from a human nervous system? I had to invent a procedure, from scratch, while you were dying. I appreciate it. You better. She stood and punched him in the shoulder, his good shoulder. I am adding this to your tab. You already owe me for the thing on Meridian 4, and the thing on the cargo station, and the thing with the Krev ambassador's shuttle. I remember. Good, because the interest is compounding. They walked together toward the docking bay. Kale's steps were steady, and for the first time in 5 months, no pain came with them. The corridor stretched ahead, open and free, and nothing pulled him back. Salith was waiting at the dock. She stood alone, without guards or ceremony, wearing simple clothes instead of her royal attire. She looked young, not in the ageless way of the Valkyrie, but in the way of someone who was still figuring out who they wanted to be. You are leaving, she said. It was not a question. I am. She nodded. She had known. She reached into her pocket and held out a small object of Valkyrie communication seal, a disk of living crystal that pulsed with gentle light. This connects directly to me. No intermediaries, no court protocols. Anywhere in the galaxy, any time. Kale took it. It was warm in his palm. What are you going to do? Change things. My mother announced a royal review of the oath chain system this morning. It is not abolishment, not yet, but it is a door that was closed for 1,000 years, and now it is open. She paused. It would be easier with a friend who is not afraid to tell me when I am wrong. You will do fine. I know, but the offer stands. He held her gaze for a moment, this alien princess who had apologized when no one asked her to, who had fought her own mother's laws to free a man she barely knew, who was now going to try to change an empire from the inside. He nodded. If you need me, he said, I will be there, not because anyone commands it, because I choose to. Salith smiled, a real smile, warm and bright, her markings glowing softly. That is worth more than any chain. Kale walked up the ramp of the Rusty Nail. Lissa was already in the pilot's seat, running pre-flight checks and arguing with Patel about whether they had enough fuel to reach the nearest free port. Akafer sat in the back, quietly cleaning a blade, as calm as if the last 24 hours had been a routine supply run. The ship lifted off the dock. Through the viewport, the throne station shrank behind them, that massive, beautiful prison of crystal and light, until it was just another star in the darkness. Lissa looked over at him. Where to, Captain? Kale thought about it. He thought about all the places he had been and all the places he could go. He thought about the scar on his chest where the chain had lived, pale lines that would never fully fade. He thought about a princess who was going to change the world, and a queen who had learned something new after 3,000 years, and a borrowed hand made of alien silver that responded to his thoughts like it had always been his. He grinned. It was the first real grin in 5 months, wide and crooked and full of something that felt dangerously like hope. Somewhere nobody owns me, he said. The Rusty Nail jumped to faster than light, and the stars stretched into lines, and Kale Morrow flew forward into a universe that was wide and dark and free. 6 months later, a message arrived on his personal channel. Salith's voice, calm and proud. The first oath chains have been voluntarily dissolved. 47 individuals freed today. It is a small step, but it is a start. Kale sat in his cockpit, alone with the hum of the engines and the glow of distant stars. He touched the scar on his chest, those pale branching lines where the chain had once burned, and smiled. Not bad, he said quietly to the empty cockpit, to the vast and listening dark. Not bad for a short-lived species.